Hello everyone and welcome to Season 7, Episode 10 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host Travis McNeil, and today we continue our countdown of the top 50 matches in CHIKARA history with match number 41 on our list, which is the CHIKARA Grand Championship match between the champion Juan de Coronado and the challenger Mike Quackenbush from the CHIKARA Aniversario Heroes Shed No Tears event held on May the 26th of 2018. Juan de Coronado, his title reign was a little bit of a blind spot for me in CHIKARA history. He, held the title kind of through those later, CHIKARA years, like after the restart, but before the end. It was where my interest in CHIKARA had really went away, and outside of King of Trios and checking in for like the occasional big match, I wasn't, watching the shows regularly. I was still following results and things like that, but there were a lot of, undercard characters that I knew their names, but really not what they were about. And, he had this run on top with all of these title matches that I didn't see. He, to me though, was the biggest surprise when watching, all of these shows back and seeing, all of these shows that I hadn't really initially seen at the time. He was, somebody that came in, while CHIKARA was done, they had kind of their shutdown angle, and we had, the pop-up of all of these Wrestling Is promotions, specifically Wrestling Is Fun. He held their Top Banana, which was kind of like their championship. And, he really started to get a bit of a push. And when CHIKARA came back in 2014 with You Only Live Twice, he wrestled on that initial show, and him and I actually got into a little bit of a back and forth on Twitter because I commented, like, as a longtime CHIKARA fan, I understand these new guys that they're working hard, but, it's not a match that I wanted to see on the restart. And I think the reason I made those comments is I was watching that show and I wasn't really enjoying it, and it immediately didn't feel like the CHIKARA I knew and loved, and ultimately would end up not being the CHIKARA that I knew and loved. He took offense to that comment and basically fired back that, they had worked for their spot, and, it's something like, oh, I'm not a true CHIKARA fan, if I don't want to see them succeed or whatever, and it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Fine, if I'm going to put criticism out there, I need to expect to have rebuttal to it, but I don't know. There was just something about it. It kind of seemed whiny to me. And because of that, he was somebody that I never really connected to. And when he ultimately won the title, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And I didn't really care. But his matches are all super, super good. He was kind of positioned like almost like this, Ric Flair or like Nick Bockwinkel kind of role where, he's this kind of undersized heel, but they established that he's a really, really great wrestler. And, he will resort to whatever tactic he needs to do to win his matches and retain his title. But he only goes to that, out of desperation when he needs to, because, he generally can just win, but with his own wrestling prowess. And, that's a role that I think he really excelled in, and it created a lot of really compelling title defenses. This one against Quack being one of the best. And I remember at the time, I did actually watch this match when it happened, and I watched it because I expected Quack to win the CHIKARA Grand Championship. Juan had this really lengthy title run with all of these title defenses, all of the guys that, you would have expected to dethrone him, like Mr. Touchdown, like Dasher Hatfield especially. I remember being really critical of them not putting the belt on Dasher. It kind of felt like, well, what's the end game to Juan's title reign? And then this match with Quack was announced. Quack had, all but retired kind of through the CHIKARA down period before the restart. He had started to pop up and make these sporadic, appearances, kind of for these dream matches with Johnny Cage and Drew Gulak and things like that. But then he had started to wrestle a bit more regularly, and it seemed like, this was going to be his moment on, Aniversario weekend, celebrating the promotion that he created. This was his first shot at the Grand Championship after not winning it in the finals of the tournament and losing to Eddie Kingston. Juan had this lengthy title reign. This seemed like the moment where that title would finally change hands. And we get, you know, a match that's really based around that, of this being, you know, Quack's moment, of Quack not going to be, you know, denied in his quest to win this title. And they do a really cool play here because Mike Quackenbush, smaller guy, has always kind of felt like this undersized wrestler, but here he's got a size and power advantage over Juan, and it kind of creates this different Quack match where he's doing like all of these big power moves and stuff that you wouldn't normally expect from him. And Juan is really great here, you know, where yes, he's a heel. Like I said, he'll do, you know, whatever it takes to win, but he also does have this respect for CHIKARA. It was the promotion that trained him. He's the champion of that promotion. It's Aniversario weekend. He's wrestling, you know, the person that created the company, and he tries to have as clean of a match as possible. And you can see this little like confliction with him at points where, you know, Quack will like control with the cravat, which is just a little nod I love that he would use like Chris Hero offense, you know, in this match. But, you know, Juan like kind of cocks his fist back a couple times, like, you know, his instinct is to punch his way out of it, but he doesn't want to do that. He wants to wrestle out instead. And there's a couple moments where Quack, you know, picks up the pace and kind of goes to this lucha stuff, and Juan, you know, hangs in there with him, you know, almost kind of surprisingly. You know, it's a Mike Quackenbush match. His back gets targeted. So that's where Juan finds his advantages, you know, throughout the match. But like I said, you know, Quack is just a man possessed in this match. When Juan starts to kind of match him through the lucha sequences, Quack just goes completely into overdrive and hits like a crazy, you know, spaceman plancha, and then ties Juan up in a bunch of knots, like forcing him to have to grab the ropes. You know, Quack goes through this big run of offense where he's hitting, you know, the Black Tornado Slam, and he hits the Quackendriver 1 and the Quackendriver 3 and the Quackendriver 4 and gets, you know, 2s off of all of these. You know, he sells the back throughout. Like there's a point when Juan tries to, you know, toss him off the top rope, kind of like the bump Ric Flair would always take, and Quack rolls through, which is one of his staples, but he sells the back, and it allows, you know, Juan to get some offense. But you know, Quack like hits power bombs in this match. There's a great moment where he hits the neutralizer and does, you know, the Claudio Castagnoli like Cesaro taunt thing, you know, his greatest rival, you know, he's borrowed his offense. And this whole match is building to what we think is going to be this big moment of Quack winning, you know, and taking the grand championship finally. But in the end, it's Juan Francisco who goes like deep into his bag of tricks, hits a super uncharacteristic tope con hilo. Quack, you know, at this point, he's not, you know, he's not selling the back, but I really feel like it's by design. He no-sells a lariat. He's hitting big palm strikes. And he makes the mistake of going for the only Quackendriver he hadn't hit, the most dangerous of them all, the QD2, which is like a leg capture, like I don't know what you call it, like a cross-legged, that's the phrase I'm trying to find. It's a cross-legged sit-out tombstone pile driver. It's a gnarly move. If you're an old school message board wrestling fan, you'll remember Canadian indie wrestler The Arsenal complaining about, you know, taking it and Quack not accurately describing the move to him and basically just dropping him on his head. It's a super risky, super dangerous move. But Quack goes for it here as his coup de grace, and it seems like that's what's going to win him the title. But Coronado was able to counter out of it, grab the Coronado clutch for the only real time in the match, grab a body scissors, and the back of Quack at this point, you know, he's got nowhere to go. It's damaged, and it actually leads to him, you know, passing out, you know, for the 3. And it's one of these matches where, you know, going in, you expect someone to win, and you have the disappointment that comes from it of that person not winning. But unlike the Dasher Hatfield title defense, where when Juan won, you were like, oh man, really? In this match, you know, when Juan pulls out the win, you're like, oh my gosh, he did it, right? Like he actually won. And that, I think, is, you know, the reaction that you should, you know, have in a match like this. It's just, this match is full of great sequences, great moves, great technical wrestling, a good story implanted into it, and it's certainly a highlight of those later CHIKARA years. If you're like me, if you missed a lot of this stuff at the time, or if you're a newer fan that wants to go back and really watch that reign of Juan Francisco. He's a guy that's no longer an active pro wrestler. So I feel like, you know, he's going to be forgotten about. But like I said, he had a really solid, really underrated run as the grand champion of CHIKARA. And even though, his character would go through a lot of kind of bad twists and turns and have a lot of muck surrounding it, some really high-level title defenses that I think hold up a lot better now than they did at the time. You can watch this match, of course, on independentwrestling.tv. You can subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50.